You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 50, Speaking Iraqi and Palestinian Arabic. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. My guest this week is Belal, and we're talking about his two dialects of Arabic from both Iraq and Palestine. In this episode, Belal tells us about growing up in an Arabic-speaking home with his family, but veering away from the language as he grew up. Our conversation centers around how he is taking the steps to improve his Arabic, but we also talk about the realities of learning a language as an adult and some of the ups and downs and often reluctant feelings we all encounter as adult language learners. What I loved about talking to Belal is how he's been able to observe the way that the language is structured, and he gives us some amazing examples in this conversation. He also tells us some really fun stories of his encounters with Arabic speakers from other countries, and we talk about how being able to communicate can be such a small thing, but can also turn out to be so meaningful. I love conversations like this because there are so many ways to connect to a language and a culture, and I think it's really important to emphasize the journey that some of us take to fluency and not just celebrate and emphasize the end result. If you've been listening to this show for a while now, you know how much I admire the Arabic language, so having this conversation with Belal was truly an honor and a privilege for me. I want to say a big thank you to Belal for sharing bits of your language journey with us and for inspiring other adult language learners, myself included. As always, if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcasts on Apple Podcasts so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I am here today with Belal. How are you today, Belal?
I'm good, El. How's it going?
Fantastic. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, and thank you so much for making the time to talk with me in this episode. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and how many languages do you speak?
So I speak two languages, English and Arabic. If I had to define one as my first language, it would probably be English because it's the language that I use every day.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up and spent a majority of my life in the US, so my English is fluent. But I grew up in an Arabic-speaking household, and for a brief period of time, I also spent some time in the United Arab Emirates.
Mm-hmm.
And so I speak Arabic. It's good, not great. Conversational understanding is really easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking is okay. Reading and writing is challenging.
I see. I think that's like typical, it's because if you didn't really study it in school, you wouldn't have an opportunity to like read and write it, right?
Right. I did do a little bit of school, both in the U.S. and overseas, but it was very high level. It was never really in depth. Arabic is like a very complex. It's a beautiful language, but it's also very complex.
Yeah.
And unless you really dedicate time to learning and studying it, it can be very difficult to master. And so, conversationally, I could have a conversation with somebody. It's a little broken. It might sound, not the most fluent. My grammar is completely off, but I can get by.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about growing up. You said you grew up in an Arabic-speaking household. What languages did you hear, I guess, if you heard any other languages in your home or in your community when you were growing up?
So both my parents spoke Arabic at home. My dad is Iraqi. He's from Iraq. And so he spoke Arabic with a Iraqi dialect. and my mom is from Palestine. She's Palestinian, and so she spoke Arabic with a Palestinian dialect. So I grew up in a dual dialect household. Uh, yes, and uh, in the community, it was pretty interesting. It's a very small college town in the middle of Missouri. It just so happened to have like a very small Arab community, predominantly Iraqi. And so the other Arab families that we spent a lot of time with and the friends that I made, they were predominantly from Iraq. And so here in the US, I had a lot of exposure to the Iraqi dialect. And then when we would travel overseas to visit my family, predominantly my mom's side of the family, my grandparents, my aunts, uncles, cousins, they spoke Arabic with a Palestinian dialect. And so I had a lot of exposure to that dialect. But for the most part, it was a pretty small community. And so a majority of the time I spent outside of home was in English. And so when I first started elementary school, my mom had actually placed me in ESL class because I guess until I was like 6 or 7 years old, we only spoke Arabic at home. But she was surprised to find out that I spoke English pretty well, and they told me I didn't need ESL class. I think maybe I just watched enough cartoons and Nickelodeon to master English on the side. And so yeah, but for the most part, I would say like 90% of my communication or my language outside of home happened in English.
Okay. Did you, when you were in school, and probably not at a young age, but maybe middle school, high school, or maybe college, did you have any opportunities to learn any other languages? Were there any other languages that were compulsory to learn where you grew up?
So when we moved overseas to the United Arab Emirates for high school, it was an American school, it was an American curriculum. So all the major courses or the major classes were done in English. But we were required to take both Arabic classes and French class.
Okay.
So for Arabic, being that I was a US citizen, I was considered like a non-Arab. And so they placed me in an ASL class. Arabic is a second language. And it wasn't really beneficial to me. I wasn't complaining. I was okay with it. But it wasn't really a challenge or an opportunity to really learn. We were going through and doing things like the alphabet, learning very basic words and very basic phrases, things that had already known just growing up in an Arabic speaking household.
Right.
And so I was never really challenged or pushed to learn Arabic at a higher level.
That's really interesting that you went to a school with an American curriculum and you had the same experience that so many people have in the US with learning other languages. Like you learn the basics, but you're not really pushed to learn to advance and become fluent.
It's true. In fact, we were discouraged from speaking Arabic in any other class besides Arabic class. You were given a detention if you spoke Arabic, for example, like chemistry or biology. It had to be English only, and then only in Arabic class were you allowed to speak Arabic. So it was pretty rigid. It was pretty controlled. They were trying to discourage people from speaking Arabic outside of Arabic class.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, I understand it. They there's a lot of people who spoke Arabic very fluently, but they wanted to push people to being in an Arab country, they wanted to push people in an American school to speak English and to learn and master English.
Right.
And so their objective was probably good, but I think for people like me who spoke English perfectly and struggled with Arabic, it wasn't an environment that was conducive to learning Arabic very well.
Right. So were you in class with a lot of international students?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that makes sense. Like for them to improve their English, but then also to know Arabic because they're in the Emirates.
Correct.
Right?
That was coming from the opposite side of things from everybody else. A lot of students were from Lebanon or Jordan or Syria or the United Arab Emirates, and so naturally their Arabic was was a lot stronger than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And so speaking Arabic with other people was easier for them. It was natural for them. And so they were being pushed or encouraged to speak English uh, in other classes so that they can enhance and strengthen their English. Whereas me coming from the US, my English was nearly perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really have that opportunity to strengthen my Arabic outside of Arabic class because everything was done in English.
Oh man. That's really interesting. I just recently I had a conversation with somebody else about international school or American school
Mm-hmm.
in the Gulf region, and like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was a thing, and now I'm so interested in like the families and the school, like the curriculum obviously, but the families and the kids who are living in this region and go to this school. Like I want to know so much more. And I'm not asking you about it. I can I'll look it up on my own time. But I think it's just like this is a really good thing about doing the show is like I learn so many new things that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's funny because I remember when we were moving. I think we moved in sixth grade. I was starting seventh grade there, and I had this fear of moving overseas, moving to a new school. I was like, my Arabic is not good enough to learn math or chemistry or biology. How I'm going to struggle so much when we get there, only to find out that it was not too different from school in the U.S. In fact, it seemed like they took the U.S. high school model or middle school model and they just dropped it in the Middle East and they created a closed or school system that operated on its own, and so it could be fully integrated into English and have all the classes and curriculum, and then just so happened to have Arabic almost like a foreign language within the
mm,
Middle East. And so it was
yeah.
no different than French or German or Italian that you would learn in high school in the US. Uh, they took Arabic and kind of just plopped it into the curriculum over there as an additional quote unquote foreign language in an Arabic speaking
In an
country.
Arabic
So
speaking country, yeah.
yeah, and so it was never really designed, at least I feel like designed to uh, help people that predominantly spoke English to actually learn Arabic. I mean, I had some other students with me that were from South Africa or from England, the UK, and I think we all went through similar experiences where it didn't really provide us a strong foundation for learning Arabic. I
Mm,
guess was a unique situation where I came from an Arabic speaking household,
yeah.
but it seemed a lot of times like those books that we were learning about or studying in high school were kind of just adapted or taken from very basic elementary school Arabic courses. And then they
Mhm.
kind of just gave it to us and be like, these are for kids that are 8, 9 years old, but you can kind of use them to get started.
Oh my God. I think it's really interesting to me, and that's why I was laughing a while ago about, you're teaching Arabic as a foreign language in an Arabic speaking country. And it
Mm-hmm.
just makes me think like, it makes me think about, and you may not have an answer for this, but if you are studying there, and let's say you are from South Africa or from the UK, and you don't have Arabic speaking parents, you don't come from an Arab speaking household, if you can, it seems like you can essentially isolate yourself away from the Arab speaking community in the Emirates without ever
Uh,
having to really, is that true?
Absolutely. In fact, you can get by in the Emirates for sure. A lot of other Arab countries too, without speaking a single word of Arabic. You
Oh my
can.
God.
Everybody. English is very it's pretty well known. I think,
Yeah.
especially in the major cities, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. If you go to Bahrain or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, you'll encounter probably a majority of the population speak English, not maybe not fluently, but you can get by. And so you can speak. You don't have to speak a word of Arabic and still get around and travel and order
Mhm.
food without any real struggle, uh, which is fortunate if you're a traveler, unfortunate if you're really trying to learn the language and learn about the culture.
Right. And that's what I mean. Like, if you move there, if I'll put it this way, if I moved there, me as myself, Black girl
Hmm.
from New York City, and I said, I'm going to move to the Emirates and I want to have this life in the Gulf, I want to interact with Arab people living
Hmm.
and working and going throughout their lives speaking Arabic in the Gulf. I don't
Hmm.
want, and this is because it's me, I don't want to isolate myself in my English language. I mean, it's great to know that I can use it and get by, but it's like if I'm going to go there and I can't interact with like the culture, I don't know like how valuable that would be for me.
Right. It's
Um,
it's it's like a surface level experience. Like you're really not going to get a lot of depth and meaning from being there if a majority, if not all, of the street signs are written in English. The people
right.
that you interact with predominantly speak English. You 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 want to be able to, you know, uh, embed yourself in a situation where you maybe experience a little bit of discomfort. You might get a little lost, but you know that you're kind of like you're in the heart of that culture as opposed to just kind of like skating by,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
using the same language just in a different location.
Mhm. Well, before I continue down this tangent that I've gone on, I want to just be mindful of the time that we have talking. So I want to ask you, with your parents' heritage from different countries, were there any moments growing up in terms of language and culture where maybe one thing your family did or said was very Iraqi, and another thing was very Palestinian? And if that did happen, what was that like? What was it like having those two very distinct cultures like together and growing up?
That's actually a great question. It's something I think about a lot, especially recently. When I think back to growing up, Arabic was just Arabic to me. My parents spoke these two different dialects, and I kind of absorbed them just as standard Arabic. Only more recently have I been like actively working to decipher and decodify these two dialects. And so,
Hmm.
for example, like you could say something very simple, like a simple statement, and it would be you would use like different words or different pronunciations of the same word in the two different dialects. So if you say, "Could you pour me a cup of tea?" In a more Iraqi dialect, you would say, "ممكن تصب لي كوب chai." And then in a Palestinian dialect, it would be ممكن تملي لي كاسة شاي. Uh,
Hmm.
so the words are different. For example, like pouring, it's sub versus timlili. These are like two completely different words.
Yeah.
Kub versus kasa, and then even the same word shai in Iraqi, you would do almost like a ch instead of an sh, and so instead of shai, it would be chai.
Okay.
Uh, and so I kind of absorbed both, and I never really kind of actively tried to decipher like which is which, but I in like daily language or when I'm speaking Arabic, sometimes people can actually pick out words that I use. So, for example, I was at a Palestinian restaurant a couple of months ago, and I went in and I spoke to the owner and asked him if the seating outside was theirs. I said, "هاي القعدة برا مالتكم?" And this word مالتكم, he heard it and he's like, "Oh, are you Iraqi?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "This is a very Iraqi word. Like as soon as you said it, I immediately knew that you were from Iraq." And
Wow.
it turned into this whole conversation. He was Palestinian, but he happened to go to university in Baghdad, and we had this like 10-15 minute conversation. And it all stemmed from using this word in an Iraqi dialect. And so I think that's the one of the beautiful things about Arabic in that it's so diverse and different,
Right.
but I think that kind of almost turns into like a conduit, an opportunity to kind of like bridge us closer together.
Yeah.
You can hear when somebody uses a specific type of word or a dialect, and you immediately know or sense where they're from, and that can kind of like spur a conversation or a connection.
Hmm. I think that's an incredible story, and I'm really glad that you were able to like I'm glad that you were able to have that experience.
It is. It is interesting. I mean, these experiences happen all the time. I remember another time where I was walking somewhere downtown near, I think, Madison Square Park, and these two women approached and they asked me if I knew where a restaurant was nearby, and I could tell by their English accent that they were probably Egyptian. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
I asked them in Arabic. I said, are you Egyptian? And they just like they cracked these smiles, and we started a little conversation in Arabic. And they told me that they're visiting from Egypt, and they've been here, here, and here, and they're trying to go to all these places. And again, it was like a little, it was like it was like a mundane moment, but it through that connection or through that interaction, that moment all of a sudden like gained meaning, or it became a memory
Right.
that I'll never forget, because it's just like recognizing where somebody is from based on their dialect or their accent, and then all of a sudden you form a connection with somebody, even if it's for like 5-10 minutes and you never see them again. It's
Yeah.
still something that's memorable.
Right. And it's really helpful for someone in that situation because you don't know where you're going. You're in a new city, you're visiting, and you're just
Hmm.
like, okay, this guy, he's a brother, like and I don't mean it like that, but I think that when you recognize someone who's in your part of your own circle, this is a brother,
Hmm.
this is a sister, this is someone that out of how many million people in the metropolitan area, and you're looking for someone who can give you some help,
Hmm.
and then you have someone who can speak your language. It's like, whoa, I'm,
Right, and it creates like some trust. It creates a connection,
exactly,
and
yeah.
and giving this information to a random stranger that you're visiting and you're from out of town isn't something that you would normally do. But all of a sudden, when you share the commonality of language,
Mhm.
it kind of just like opens up doors and it opens up trust. So,
Absolutely, yeah. So you talked to me before we had this conversation about your desire for speaking Arabic as you got older beginning to fade. Tell me what that experience was like, I guess, growing up with your parents speaking Arabic and then just getting to that age where you didn't want to continue speaking it.
yeah, I would say a word that characterizes that is maybe ignorance. Uh, Growing up in in a small little town in the Midwest, where outside of my immediate household everything was spoken in English, I kind of had a very small worldview. And I remember thinking, Arabic is just something I speak at home. It's not really something that I'm going to need in the future. Uh, 90% of my day is spoken in English. All the media and entertainment and books that I'm consuming are done in English. Arabic is just a thing that happens at home, not realizing that there's this world beyond uh, Missouri where Arabic is spoken. And so I think at a young age in elementary, middle, and high school, I never really saw the true value of speaking a second language, speaking Arabic.
Mm.
Uh, and so I remember distinctly, I attended a Sunday school essentially in elementary and middle school, and we would go through the process of like learning the alphabet and learning Arabic. And uh, I remember in class we would go through letter by letter, and the teacher would say, "Okay, like the letter Beth, like everybody give me a word or shout out words that start with this letter."
Mhm.
And everybody would say words, and our homework was or our assignment was, we would have to write these words out on a piece of paper before having to go out to recess, being allowed to go out to recess.
Mhm.
And I wanted everybody else to not say any words, because my main objective was, I want to get out there and go to recess. I'm not really too interested in learning Arabic. And so it was never really a priority to me. Now I realize that uh, language is a conduit to deepening our connection with our family, with our heritage, with our culture. Uh, I mean, speaking with my aunts and my uncles overseas, I speak in Arabic, but it's challenging to dig below the surface to have any real depth or meaningful conversation with my Arabic being as limited as it is, it's definitely not something that I can replicate when I have a conversation in English. And so, you know, in my younger years, it wasn't really something that I saw as important. But now, I mean, I think it's human nature to want to learn about your past, about your history, your family, your story. And I think language is essential to unlocking that.
Right, right, for
And
sure.
yeah, I've had so many great opportunities through my life to learn Arabic, and I feel like I've squandered them all. And
Oh,
so I'm realizing that now it's such an important thing, and so now I'm starting to be more active about finding resources, practicing Arabic daily, using it in conversation. One thing that I've struggled with is you feel like your Arabic or your language is weak, and so you feel a little maybe like embarrassed or shy about using it, and so you're reluctant to use it, and
right.
that just creates like a cycle of your fluency getting worse because you're not using it. You could study all the books, you can watch all the YouTube videos you want. If you're not practicing constantly or consistently, uh, the strength of your language or the fluency of your language will fade. And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of it was overcoming uh, that fear of making mistakes, being more confident about making mistakes, about failing, about being corrected.
Hmm.
And once you break through that barrier and you start practicing and speaking with other people, even if it's pretty weak, I think it gets better over time.
Yeah. That's a lesson that I'm learning for myself actually too, is like stop being afraid of
Mm-hmm.
saying something stupid, you know, because because everybody has to go through it at some point. And I think you're right. Once you can break through that barrier and you can get over your own ego,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can really uh, get in touch with, you know, your why, your reason for wanting to learn it, and you can move forward and stop holding yourself up, stop standing in your
Mm-hmm.
own way, I guess.
I think there's an expectation that language should be perfect,
Uh-huh.
and so you're never gonna like just walk outside and start speaking a language perfectly or fluently. You're gonna make a lot of mistakes throughout the process, and it's a learning process. And so
Mhm.
that's what I've learned. I felt like I've had to hide uh, how poorly I speak Arabic until it's drastically improved, and I can kind of like show it off as this great fluent language. I'm
Right.
never going to get to that stage unless I make those mistakes initially and have awkward, weird interactions or conversations and be corrected.
Mhm.
And that's really the only way that you're gonna improve.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there an instance or maybe anything specific that made you regain interest in speaking Arabic?
I mean, I think I've always known that it's something is essential or important to me. Maybe when I was younger and I was a little more ignorant, I didn't realize the value or the weight that it carried.
Mhm.
Uh, I think it's more so I've known that I need to improve it. It's just I was always looking for an external motivation, something that to come along and push me to do it.
Mhm.
Learning a language is not something that you can kind of rely on external motivation. It really requires you to kind of just dive in and, like we were talking about earlier, accepting mistakes, accepting failure, uh, and learning throughout the process. I
Mhm.
think if I was attributed to one specific event, I mean, I think the pandemic over the past year has kind of made us realize how important human connection is.
Right.
And I spoke a lot to my family overseas, probably more so than I had in the past during this period of time. I think my aunts and uncles were really interested in the experience of living in New York during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And so I would call and give them a lot of those details. But I realized how important family is and heritage is and culture is. And again, if my Arabic is not as strong or as fluent as it could be, there's always going to be a cap or a threshold that I won't be able to cross in terms of conversation or connection with family. And so I've been trying to practice and strengthen it, and hopefully that'll serve as a way to kind of like better connect with family and better connect with culture and heritage.
Hmm. That's so exciting. I don't know if I told you this before, but um, I'm I'm obsessed with Arabic. I want
It's
to learn so bad, but I
hmm
know that I need to find the time. A fellow who works in my building, um, he was talking to me one day and he mentioned like his wife was going, this was like during the pandemic, and he said, oh, his wife and his daughter are going out of town for like a month. So he was saying how he had to get back and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I like to talk to people. So I said, where are they going? And he said, oh, they're going back to Egypt. And I was
mm.
like, oh my God. And I looked at him. I must have turned around so fast. I was like, are you Egyptian? And he must have thought like, oh God, like what is wrong with her? But um he's like, I was like, are you Egyptian? He's like, yeah, like my family's from Egypt, and his daughter, I think, was going to school, like she's going to college in Cairo, I think. And
Oh, exciting.
yeah, and I really wanted to, I know he had other things to do, but I just wanted to like, such as we are now, like I just wanted to like sit down and just like tell me everything about your culture, about Egypt and about your language. And then I had my one Arabic word on deck that I always use, and I really need to learn some more. But he was leaving, and I said shukran, and he was just like, "What?" And then he said afwan, and I was like, "Okay, wait." And I said, "I don't know that word yet. What does it mean?"
That's awesome.
And I
That's
was just so pleased with myself that, and I know it's silly, it's really silly, but it's definitely not like the stories that you've had and making the connections with, with other Arabic speakers. But I just like, for me, knowing like one word meant so much to me. And
hmm
then he said to me, he said, next time I see you, he said, have another word or another sentence or something. And I was like freaking out, like, oh my
Well,
God.
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. But I really
I
think
think
that, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's an interesting, that's actually a great story because I think Arabic is, I don't know where it ranks in terms of like languages across the globe, but it's a language that's, I know it's an official language of the UN and it's spoken in 20, 21, 22 countries. It is
Right.
a major language, but it's not a language I think that a lot of people strive or crave to learn.
Mm,
It's not like Spanish or French or Italian or maybe even Russian. Like I think there's these languages that people are drawn to or attracted to learn, and I often don't hear that Arabic is one of them. It's it's very complex and challenging, but it's also a very beautiful, majestic, poetic language. Uh, I mean, I can give you some examples of things that I've found that I'm just kind of like just blown away by, and it's
yeah, tell me. I mean, I think you said majestic, and to me, like that's how I feel. Like it's just,
hmm
there's so much history in the language. There's so much
hmm
pride in the Arab people. There's so much beauty in the language. There's so much beauty in the sounds of Arabic,
it,
and
it, it,
I hate when people say like, "Oh, Arabic sounds like angry or it sounds harsh," and it's like, are
no,
you listening?
no.
Like, are you listening to the sounds of it?
I
Because it
could
doesn't sound like that at all.
no. I mean, so like here's an example that I've always just been amazed by. Arabic is has almost like a root system where letters form the foundation of a theme of words. So like there's three letters like ka, ta, and ba. These three letters have a almost like a theme or a foundation for things that have to do with writing. For example, if you just say them, in in order, ketaba, that means somebody wrote or he wrote. If you say kitab, that means book. If you say mektab, it means desk or office. All these things kind of are like a theme around writing. and they're
Mm.
all derived or rooted in the same three letters.
Wow.
And then adding to that complexity, that the same three letters can be pronounced uh, differently or in different tones to create a different word. So like keteba is three letters, and if you pronounce it with that tone, it means wrote. But the same three letters, if you pronounce them differently or in a different tone, they mean book. Uh, it's it's on one hand, it's like, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of beauty and depth in that. On the other hand, it makes it complex because you could look at the word and read it in two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think linguists have like developed little symbols that you can add above or below a letter to kind of like guide you or aid you in pronouncing the tone of a letter, or the you know the indicate how a tone or how a letter should sound.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as the Arabic sounding like extremely harsh or aggressive, I hear that all the time. I feel like it's something that's exaggerated or perpetuated in the media. I
Yeah.
when I hear somebody speak Arabic, uh, I just I just feel like it carries so much beauty and emotion and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, another story about meeting a random Arab person here in my own building in the elevator. I stepped in a couple of months ago and I saw these two women who I recognized as Arabs, and I said a very standard traditional greeting, "Assalamu alaikum," which means like peace be upon you.
Mm-hmm.
And their eyes lit up. They were
Oh.
like, "Whoa, who are you? Where are you from?" When I told them I was half Palestinian, they became enamored. Like they were like, how did we not know that there's another Palestinian living in the building?
Mm.
And so just again through language, through commonality of language, we shared a connection. And the funny thing is, 2 days later, they stopped by and dropped off some sweets and some food. And we have this like system of dropping food to each other. So she'll make me a meal, I'll make them like a cake or some
Oh my
baked goods.
God.
And and back to the discussion about Arabic being aggressive, I can't think of an instance where we've ended a conversation or ended an interaction that doesn't take like 2 to 3 minutes of saying goodbye.
Mm.
Uh, it feels like the language is rooted in like generosity and hospitality and kindness.
Right.
Like
Right.
I have to say bye like 5 different times or in 5 different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and it might take me like 30 seconds. And I feel like I don't have enough goodbye material because when they say goodbye, they could say like thank you and express gratitude for like 3-4 minutes, and I'm like, my Arabic is so limited, I could only say goodbye for like 30 to 45 seconds. And it's not enough, like I have to express more gratitude and more thanks. And
Yeah.
so that's like something I'm trying to like learn, like how to perfect or better when I want to thank somebody or say goodbye or greet somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like it's the language just has such kindness and generosity rooted
Right.
in it.
Right. And I agree with you. I tell people all the time, like some of the nicest people that I've ever met and come across have been Arab speakers. I'm sorry,
Mm.
Arabic speakers.
Mhm.
Some of them have been Arab, some of them have been African, but um, this is not something I want to get into, and because I think it's like another topic for a different show, but like I hate the portrayal of Arab people and Arabic speakers in Western media. And I think it's
Mm.
bullshit. And, I wish that people would like open their eyes and
Mhm.
like just actually talk to people and meet people and understand people because we're all human beings, like
Mhm.
I will go on way too long about this, but I don't want to, but I just want to say that I agree with what you said about, the majestic uh, aspect of the language and the kindness and giving and generosity of, Arabic speakers and Arab people. So you are improving your Arabic language
Mhm.
and
Trying.
What? You're trying? No, you're doing. You're doing. You're not trying. What steps have you started taking toward improving, and how's it going?
Good question. So I think we talked about it earlier about having a ton of confidence, being okay with making mistakes, being okay with sounding weird and being corrected. Again, like you use the word ego. It's important, I think, to let go of that ego and be willing to make mistakes. One thing that I definitely want to plug in, I don't have any stake or ownership in it, but it's a program that or a platform that I've been using that I found immensely helpful. It's called Netakellem. Uh, and I think now during quarantine more than ever, it is a great service or platform that people can use if they want to improve their Arabic. And it's kind of ingenious. I believe it's a woman who started this company, and she finds predominantly refugees, people that have had to leave Palestine or Syria or Iraq or Lebanon, and they've been displaced in these other countries, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in South America. And they have these real tangible skill sets, but because they've been displaced, maybe the language isn't as strong as it needs to be for where they've had to move. And so they can't really readily use their skill sets, but they do have this skill of speaking Arabic. And so I have been doing this for maybe 3 to 4 months, 2 hours a week, twice a week. I Skype with what I would now consider a friend, a Syrian friend who lives in Brazil. And the conversation is fully in Arabic. We talk about our day, we talk about our lives, work, what we've been doing, what we plan on doing, just very conversational. Sometimes it's pretty surface. A lot of times it gets pretty deep. And what's great about it is it's a situation where you can be open about making mistakes. Like I will say a sentence, but then maybe like the last word, I just don't know how to say it in Arabic, and I'll say it in English, and he'll correct me and tell me, oh, well, this is how you would say it in Arabic. Or you said this statement or the sentence incorrectly. This is a better way to say it. And so on one hand, it's very conversational. You're never going to improve language without conversing. And so I found it immensely helpful. And he's even told me, like, I can sense your Arabic is improving. I've also been reading with him. And so we would open up a PDF. I would go through and read it. I'm still sounding out words. Feels like I'm in first or second grade. But it feels like I'm making progress and I'm improving, and I'm feeling more confident about it.
Yes.
And so I know that they do other languages too. It might be Spanish and French. So I'd encourage people, if they're really interested in especially learning Arabic, they should check it out. It's called Nitakellem. And they even do dialects. You can actually specify the dialect that you're looking to speak. For example, you mentioned Egyptian. They do have people on there that specialize in Egyptian dialect. So if people are interested in learning Arabic, I think it's a great platform.
Okay. I'm going to check it out personally. And I'm also going to add it. I'm also going to add it into the show notes so that anyone listening can just click and take it from there. Thank you for that. That's a really helpful resource. I like resources, and it's good to have people share what's working for them and what's not. So you're learning, you're improving, your Arabic's getting better. What areas of learning, improving your Arabic have been easy, and what areas have been more difficult for you?
So speaking is getting significantly easier. I think the more that you speak with somebody, the more natural it becomes. Reading is also improving a bit. Writing Arabic is, I think, immensely challenging. It is completely different. I mean, you can't even really think about it in terms of translating or converting from English to Arabic. You kind of have to like cast aside that mindset and almost just like live in Arabic only.
Right.
And so writing is challenging. I think the script itself is very difficult. There are so many rules, complicated rules, I think, in Arabic, where things are prolonged and letters. I think letters just have so many ways in which they could be pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the letter A, there are just right off the bat 3 ways in which the letter A can be pronounced, like the tone in which it could be said. You can say A, U, and E. And then there are dozens, if not more, rules as to like how it could be pronounced. It could be extended, it could be shortened, it could be silent. It is just immensely complicated. And so that ventures a little bit into reading. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you can see the same word and it could be pronounced 2 to 3 different ways and have two to three different meanings.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that's just very challenging to master. So writing, I think, is most difficult for me. Conversation is getting better, and reading is also getting better.
Yeah. It seems like um, you said this, but as someone who, like, I haven't studied it at all and, really looked at the alphabet in Arabic, um, it seems like for somebody who, I mean, you at least have the background where you've been
Mm-hmm.
speaking it and you've been seeing these letters for
Mm-hmm.
most of your life. And I think that, like, for me, this is why I said, like, I really want to learn Arabic, but I feel like I'd have to cast everything in my life aside because, and I don't mean that to, be derisive. I just mean it in, like, I look at the alphabet
Mm-hmm.
and I look at how I'd have to not only learn the letters and learn how they look and learn how they're written, but then I'd have to learn how they're spoken too.
It's
And yeah. Uh,
I sympathize you with completely. I often think like if I didn't have a background or a foundation in Arabic, how would I even manage this? Because
mhm.
the 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 written language is so, at least for me, very complicated. In English, every letter stands on its own. In Arabic, the letters, it depends on what letter comes before it and what letter comes
Yes.
after it to dictate how it's written and how it's pronounced.
Yes.
And so there are so many rules and foundational rules to learning to read and write Arabic. And I feel like you have to dedicate a lot of time and practice in order to really get good at it. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't, I think you can't even do that on your own. You can read books, you can watch lectures. You really need to sit with somebody that really understands the language in order to fully understand and appreciate it.
I'll
Not to
tell
discourage
you,
anybody
yeah.
from doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know how somebody could open a book, see Arabic, and and read it or pronounce it or say it. It just doesn't seem like the language is conducive to doing that. It needs somebody. You
Right.
have to sit with somebody who understands
Well, let me tell you a true story, sir, that I told this
it.
episode on I told this story probably more than once, so I'm telling you again because I don't know who's heard it or who's not heard it, but when I was in college, I studied Italian and I studied French. And when I didn't study them as my major, but I took classes in them. And then when I got out of college, I wanted a new language challenge. And I said, this is my time to learn Arabic. I had not one Arabic speaking friend or, anybody in my life who spoke Arabic. So what did I do? What I did the same thing that I would do, foolishly to learn anything. I went to the bookstore and I bought a book.
It's a good place to start.
Right. So I said, I got this book. I think it was like Arabic for Dummies or something. It was like something like really rudimentary. And I got this book. I may still have it. I keep meaning to check my parents' house to see if it's still there. And I felt you couldn't tell me a single thing walking out of that store. Like I just knew I was on my way to my new Arabic speaking life. And I was so excited. I tell you, I didn't get past the letter A in Arabic because because as you said, there's many ways to pronounce it. And as I'm reading this, I'm reading English words in a book.
Hmm.
That's not going to tell me how to pronounce it.
No,
You know,
it doesn't translate at all. At least
right,
I don't think so.
right. So that's as far as I got. I think it was maybe I stuck with it for maybe a week and a half, maybe 10 days. And I said,
Mm.
I think it's too late to take this book back, but but I don't think
Yeah,
this is an effective method for me. For learning.
yeah. I've found, as you did, it needs guidance. It's
Right.
I mean, there are letters in the Arabic alphabet that don't exist in English, and so I don't know how somebody would even be able to pronounce it or say them correctly. I think also Arabic has a lot of, again, depth and meaning. There are words in Arabic, like a single word, that I feel like require multiple sentences in English to really convey what they're trying to mean.
Hmm.
And so I haven't even reached that stage. Like, I'm still struggling with those words. And so
Hmm.
you can take a full, like a half a page of Arabic, and it would require like 2 to 3 pages of translation in English to really convey what that half page of text is saying.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's immensely complex. I'd recommend people find somebody that speaks Arabic. Even courses, I feel like, have their limitations. Conversational Arabic and speaking with other people is really, I think, the best way to get started
Hmm.
in learning Arabic.
Yeah. What are some things about the Arabic language and Arab culture in the Gulf or in the Middle East that you would want people to be aware of that they may not be aware of?
Again, the Arabic language has so much depth and meaning and emotion. The culture is very generous and hospitable and kind. I think back to some of the best moments that I remember of traveling overseas and visiting family. Is I have some family in Lebanon, in Lebanon, in Saida, and I remember going to the souk, the old market, and it was just so beautiful. How I remember distinctly, like, the memories that meant the most to me was like walking with family down the souk, the old market. Uh, the people were so kind and warm and generous. The place was the environment was like rich with history and culture and architecture. I love like old cities and history and architecture. So seeing like the archways
Mm.
and the cobbled streets and the stonework, seeing the people shopping at the bakeries and buying spices and street food and textiles and walking along the Mediterranean. I think there's a negative perception of Arabic and of uh, the language of, a negative perception of Arabic and the Middle East. And it's really a very beautiful, simple, generous, and giving culture. And I think that's reflected a lot in the language. Again, like when we were talking earlier about the 5 minutes that people spend when they say like goodbye and they're expressing thanks and gratitude. I think that's seen in the language and in the culture, just how kind and hospitable people are.
Yeah. I'm glad you shared that. As soon as you mentioned like the marketplace and the spices and stuff, I'm like, oh, I want to be there.
That's one thing I plan on doing post pandemic, is going back and really, those are opportunities that when I was younger. I think a lot of things you do when you're a child
Hmm.
or younger, you don't really recognize the blessing. You're not really grateful for the experience of being able to visit another country and see extended family.
Hmm.
And you look back on that now and you're like, wow, like I wish I took advantage of that opportunity more. And it's something that you want to achieve and do again when you're older. So
Yeah.
as soon as this is over and travels back to normal, I'll be spending a lot of time, I think, overseas, trying to go visit family and relive some of those memories
Yeah.
that I had when I was younger.
I hope you have the opportunity to do that. I think you've definitely inspired me to want to go and, visit the Gulf and visit the Middle East and just I want to just soak it all in, because it's like
Yeah.
I know it's a lot, but I would love to see it someday, and that's like one of my big dreams in life to be able to do that. Thank you so much, Bilal, for having this conversation with me. And I've had so much fun talking with you and learning from you as well. I'm so happy you were able to make the time to talk with me. And I like to end each episode on the same question. Do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Arabic to share?
I do. Something that I've been reflecting back on, especially with the past year that we've had. In life, there's always challenges and difficulties and setbacks, many of them that are beyond our control. And so there's a saying in Arabic, لا تحاول أن تغير المواقف لكن حاول أن تغير تفكيرك عن المواقف أو حاول أن تغير طريقة تفكيرك عن المواقف. And what that translates to is don't always try to change the situation. Instead, change the way you think about a situation. I think sometimes you experience like a setback or a difficulty, and the harm is magnified by how you think about that difficulty or that situation. Mm-hmm. And if you kind of reframe the way you think about it, or find some sort of moment of gratitude or thanks, you can always kind of alleviate that setback or that harm from that situation. So,
yeah. I love that one. And usually I ask my guests to teach it to me when they answer this question. And I feel like that was a long one and we would be here for another hour, I think. But if you want to teach me part of it, I would love to learn part of it.
Yeah, we could do the second half.
Okay.
So I'll just say it and then we'll break it down word by word.
Okay.
حاول أن تغير تفكيرك أو حاول أن تغير طريقة تفكيرك عن المواقف. So the first word is حاول.
حاول.
أن. اتغير.
One more time.
اتغير. Perfect. طريقة. Perfect. تفكيرك. عن. المواقف. Perfect. You're right there. You're right there with me.
I don't know if I'm right there with you, but maybe my enthusiasm is.
But I mean, you see, there's a lot of letters in there that are not easily, I think, translated or transcribed in English. Like the letter ha, I don't even know if that really exists in English. Like we have two letters for that, like ha and ha. They're two distinct letters, two different sounds, and I think English doesn't, capture both of those. So sometimes it's challenging.
It is very challenging, and I'm still struggling with the ghain. So it's like I cannot get the sound to come out of the back of my throat. I'm working on it. Like I'm working on getting the sound to start there. So
that's my experience in Arabic class. I've never had a class where a lot of the conversation is about where to place your tongue when pronouncing a word. Like this sound comes from the back of your throat. This sound comes from more through your teeth. Make sure to place your tongue on the top of your mouth when pronouncing this word. It's like it's like so physical in how you it requires so much like understanding of where to place your how to orient your mouth in order to pronounce some of those words. So.
Right. And everyone should know that. So if you're listening and you're on your Arabic language journey, find someone who can help you with that placement and make your life a lot easier than mine is right now. So Belal, once again, I'm honored that you shared so much of your story with me and so much of your life and experiences. And I really had a great time chatting with you today. Really quickly,
Hmm.
don't think too hard. What, in this situation, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
One of the many ways to say goodbye, but I think the simplest way is to say مع السلامة, which means with safety.
Mar salama,
مع السلامة. Perfect.
mar salama, Belal. Shukran.
عفوا عفوا.
Thank you so much again for talking to me, and I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Later, Al. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.